So here I have an example of something, a lesson that I want. And so I'll talk with you a little bit about what I want the students to get and then how I'm hoping to achieve that. So this is the neural control of sleep. How does coffee work? Does anybody know? What is coffee? What does it do? Why do people drink coffee? I have some coffee here. Why do people drink coffee?
The coffee is not caris, coffee carchigiores, and yellow coffee the tongues, me coffee tongue ginseng caris.
I need answers from the group. What do you think? How does coffee work?
Coffee like a candle chigre, start the collage and then to song chidasa.
Le coffee to nangi mukoeta, tenedirage. Ani subus trekero, or the rangi.
It stops us from sleeping, and also it gives our body some kind of heat. Warms.
Yeah, so if you're using a cup, you can feel the heat. It warms you up a little bit, and it can warm you from inside out. But also, it keeps you awake, or it stops you from sleeping. So what I want to know as a neuroscientist is how that happens. Okay. And this is even just this morning when I opened my email, I saw an article in the New York Times about coffee.
That didn't show up Rajagushi email Kashis Tambala, Lotan Kashis Tambalaya, then you develop gone like them, coffee gone like them big and it's on each those.
So it says that there's a study, a new study that shows that people who drink moderate amounts of coffee have a lower risk of dying than people who don't drink coffee.
That could be some juice coffee and ding by Mangler ran some chitonic mete, the Chani Metonile, and it's chiagi to Persevere, and the Yankati Chuan to Chichinjo and Yankachuan to Lashas.
So when you click on the article, I'm sure it will describe the study, what they found, and how it fits into the general social context.
That and I get any so big by Banakarishin Grace and a co Carsogre. Somiti Carico inventan that the inju de Kusu Canado, that Shinochi Canado, Nigi, Yumeta, and then also Chigi, any amount solaya, any Chilopapo on la Canado Chico, Chicasa Ransom Canado Chin and the Hakodes.
So this is the application part. This is how practical it is. But I want us as neuroscience students and teachers to learn about what mechanisms might be contributing to this.
That take a labarna cogita pechoge, Jogu Garanshinti de Shigabores, Tanga, Monsa Terupachi in the Channing at another Pritsulaya, the data, John Yagi, John Tanchi or what they can do and they how can you do this?
So if we go back to how does coffee work, I'm going to ask you in your groups to take 5 minutes and look in the internet or whatever resources you can find to see if you can figure out how does coffee work in the brain.
다치 주체 거리 요바인 바이나로 또 배치 당대대 아니 특자세 되게 배치 가나로지 당게 요면 하버던 속에 특자 되게 가서 랩빅 나와야 자와 가나로지 지게 요면 때 차로지.
And I have deliberately given you very few directions because I want you to see whatever you find. I will then tell you what I really want you to learn out of it. But before that, I do want you to struggle a little bit and to look around and see if you can find something.
다다다 데라야 지수다 돈을 제야 되게 콜라야 데라야 지고 남도 마스나 롭 쓰고라 다 지책을 지 남도 좀 마시지메스 다 조데가를다나 지수 가리 자자 가리 녀녀 지지야지로 되가는 하버다 나도 시스tam발에 kuchira bashira jimis dambalaya jela kange distea jiongurwa manada tegi jelaya ani ko misegi da kari chitse guye meda kadse guye mela sopa sumoto chins.
So 5 minutes in your groups, see if you can figure out how coffee works in the brain, what brain parts, what neurotransmitters, anything at all that you can find about how coffee works in the brain.
다 karmanga girina ya chituru khana ni ani nyamtu che ro khasusu ngone ani coffee gi tanga so lepino na cha kana ro chi chi gi yeme lepi gi chashi kana ro chi la kare le chi gi yeme de la ya wansa ga thumba kare chi yome la so pa gi ngone to ni khatso ra ba chi ta pi chan chi ni nyamtu che ro chis.
Okay, so 5 minutes.
La so karmanga.
Were you able to find anything?
Yes, we found something.
Okay, let's hear it.
Yes, all Jason.
It says there's some kind of, I think neurotransmitter called the adenosine or something.
Yes.
So it has to be bind to the adenosine receptors. So when you're having lots of coffees, they have a chemical called the caffeine. So caffeine is, instead of adenosine to bind to the receptor, and the caffeine bind to that adenosine receptor, that basically, as a result, the adenosine is blocking. So that's, prevent to kind of sleep and, laziness, and wakes up or alertness, it continues to stay long. So that basically, I think is that. Yeah.
Very good. That's very good.
단단 예바데 갈라나 가서 adenosine H2 adenosine 디 저기 바나 가서 그때 adenosine receptors adenosine 코네나 마스토가 데라 저고요 와 저스타 바라네 소다 니코에 되는 거죠 아니 단다디 값이 바나 가서 커피 나나 caffeine 세기 아니 그 제치오레스타 제데 단다기 넬람바디가 저데티 아니 코가 셴다딘 저기지고요 말와 디스탄발라야 니마 코야 당하는 세레데야 좀 부차기니 당당고도스.
Did any other groups find additional information or different information, something else they wanted to share?
data manda wa de gang la ya ane ni chu thepa de da ra song is den sin yen da na la ni ti yo ba na ngo ta na jes
단다 디나니 타게나 다디니 니 디저통와라 니코 레페기 니 타가라 상보로 데데치 아니 유롱보딜라 단다디 나사 단다 알즈마르 다 데네 파르킨슨요 오테랑이라니 디스 펜도로 아니 요야라 고 칼로타 딜레 펜토야로 나사 딩이보디 고버체야라 펜도지 아니 펜도로데 오디르시
what we found is the benefit temporarily it keeps us awake. And in the long term, online, we have found that it helps prevention of Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease.
Okay, also very good. So 2 different scales and scopes for the answer. So one answer was at the receptor level with neurotransmitters, and the other was at the application level, talking about Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. So if we go back, my intention or the topic is the neural control of sleep. So what I really want you to know about are the neurotransmitters and the structures involved in sleep. I could start with just presenting the information about adenosine. But I wanted you to find the information so that when I start talking about it, you have something to connect to. So adenosine, as mentioned by the first group, is a neuromodulator, and they didn't say this, but this is important. It is released by neurons that have been very active. When a cell is very active, it has many byproducts. So it has waste products, or it releases products after it has been very active. An accumulation or a collection of these products can be an indication of how busy or hardworking the cell was. So if all of your neurons are working very hard, they are going to be producing a lot of adenosine. And go ahead.
Okay, chorangi wansa tazu chamagi ani ko karsu ta leka ta hurpu cheba imbaina telatene data ngasugeta adenosine sati shuchembolo yongures.
So if you have receptors that can pick up adenosine, so receptors that will bind adenosine, they are able to gauge how active a cell has been.
Ahada keti chorangla ani adenosine ti nilen chinige ani karsati ge nilen batinda yopambana nilen yobati gatele adenosine tin jawala tene gari chorangi chenjet kresena ani thapon de ko ani jonglo ka tsuyo mero hurpu ka tsuyo meti chejat kyores.
So this is a very useful mechanism because as the cells are active and releasing adenosine, the amount of adenosine that your brain is seeing can be an indication of how tired the cells are.
Ahanda danda dikare sena nga tsuge litsu di tanda ge adenosine loya ge namba chigorwa de ani ko pen pechu yochu litsu chagres ta dige karsege sena lepig nangla ya ani karsa adenosine di shuchenbo lopa na dige ne chorange wangsa tasu de ta ni leka shuchenbo katsu chimen ta tela tene tan ko kali katsu kha yume ge ne tan de dige ani chumber chigores.
So a surplus of adenosine sends a message that the cells have worked very hard and they are tired, so it's time to rest.
Ahanda dinstambala ya ngasu lepig nane wangsa tasu nane ya tanda adenosine tepa mambuch to baina ko tepa mambuch lo baina dige karese goresena ani kuge danda ko kadaruchi karige dati tango resena dige kariton goresena ton kariton goresena ne wangsa tazi tizuge ro wangsa tazi tizuge leka shuchenbo jeje ne kalika shasta tanda ta ko ngesu ya nyegi tsusin shase ge dati tegures.
So what the caffeine does, it is a naturally occurring molecule that will block the receptors and prevent the brain from being able to read just how hard the cells have worked.
Ahanda dinstambala ya tanda ngasu coffee tongi kapsu coffee nana caffeine chi oro data ranshonge koge andujiji kuimbaina karichi goresena tanda ge adenosine koge nelembati ganlan jerdete ane adenosine de pa jagachi yo marete jagmachi stambala ya ane leba de la ya da susu leba la ya ane wangsa thazi tizu kali jabchi kali khanu ge chatindi pa la ya tegichi yo mares.
So if a lot of adenosine means that you will start to sleep, when you block the adenosine receptors, you will not sleep.
That is the adenosine tissue chamber will be a cup seen by na and it's a new currensha segdatian good simbana take nilembati cup in bana and it's like that new kuchiko mares.
So this is an understanding of a mechanism, but what I want the students to know is the name of the neuromodulator and how it works.
That decoration and that dig for leka chetangale sutiris, Tangarangi winning by Narwa, little protsuge and dagi, that once a tato de what that necessity minda who leads to Tanchorwa, data ne hakuya giriwachi, yes.
So I'll go back because, oh, wrong way, pardon me. Okay. Do you remember the name adenosine from anywhere else in your studies?
Adenosine said, "Ani shenda to ani chitsugayan konyondo esa."
Did you learn this in biology about ATP?
Jingwi sanrikanani ngaso et nuba ATP says or the cups jandu esa.
That's a real question. Do you remember?
Yes, we remember.
Yes? So tell me about ATP in biology. I need an answer from a group.
ATP in a cursor is.
ATP energy
Gives energy.
Yes. So how it gives energy is it's adenosine triphosphate. So it's adenosine with 3 phosphate groups.
then you take is no kind of go by na tambo de la ATP wa ani tanda giti kaps adenosine tang nyampe no phosphate side group de smure try like smures.
When you break a bond between any of these phosphate groups, energy is released.
Now that the caps so phosphate rucati wa then chiki paro which hawati by bana teletani and is.
So there's a lot of energy in these bonds between adenosine and the 3 phosphates.
Adenosine phosphate de la sumio wa COVID inzindo sumio chuti paro which hawati the banana and new hajan is.
Cells need this energy, and so they break the bonds between the phosphates, and then you get left with adenosine.
That is the Balakachigores and that Tapolo Nuba Google is on that they get Nukusu Paro, which Hawati traded it, Hawati traded in the Ragu or Tapolo going in Badra, and also had the Garlagos, Nedens in the Haviris.
So if adenosine triphosphate is the most energy you can have, and you use up all of your phosphate energy, then you will have adenosine remaining.
That they have said adenosine triphosphate, rather says phosphate, sometimes then be dig, the dig and all and Nuba Marshu by Bana, that Nuba Marshu by you to data go get Chawat Latin Yorwa, that Chawat really trilogy, and Nuba the Pichodan by Bana, as the Tamal Haya, the adenosine Hagiris.
So adenosine receptors can pick up and sense when adenosine is by itself, and that's a nice measurement for how much work a cell has done.
The capsule Coranta, take that Chawa Kanza trade adenosine to Christian Hub by Bina, and it take up some as with the Koganilamberg landed on Patant Curious. That dig that co de Carriga Chantomas Yabuch Resena, Chaponte, Lika Shuchimbo Katsuchi Chindu Sachura, Titoyage, and Santa Yabuch Res.
Any questions right now?
Joa, yes. I have a question.
No questions?
I have one question.
Yes, what is your question?
On the previous slide, when you have mentioned about ATP into ADP, at the moment you have mentioned about breaking down all the bond,
Yes.
all the just.
So ATP goes to ADP, so it's adenosine triphosphate, then it goes to diphosphate, then monophosphate, right? So you could have so here it's just 2, and then you could also just have 1 AMP, but that doesn't have any activity, and then you could just have adenosine by itself. So each bond that you break T, then it becomes D, then it becomes M, then it's just a single molecule of adenosine.
Okay, thank you so much. I asked this because when we talk usually about the mechanism, they say like converted from ATP to ADP. They just go further from there.
So usually it's ATP to ADP and then back, right? So it's just taking that one off. But you can also break it in times of crisis. You have adenosine monophosphate, and then when it's really working hard, you can just have adenosine. So that will happen sometimes, and it's the accumulation of just adenosine that demonstrates just how hard the cells have worked.
Okay, thank you. Tantangi draw tangati currency na namjing atsu niju ke keche sham stambala ATP ni ADP la juji da tantang dina tanmashi yomarwa himbana yang tantang gelan de sham stambala thamatela adenosine chipul haegi keche de shigdo wa stambala chawa chama juji ni watamba yoba keche de shigdo atanda yorwe namjing bana ngasugi ATP ni ADP la yang junumashi da ATP system bala tambotela ngasu phosphate ro khatis mi yorwa Rima phosphate ro khani yo such an yorwa what is Tambala, a Canada system, Namji Banangasuti, something goes that some Layanga that you that angle Kelepatan, the Niba Hajam Kuika in Baina, the Karchigores and Angasuge, that the diphosphate chorua, ADP chorua, take mono la chagoris, the phosphate density much major in that chagoris. Take a gel at Andoin Banang who Parogachwati traded the Tama the adenosine chipul high in the chagoris. That is Tambala, take it. Nubati, Kuchawagi, Chamba Latini Chomvigi, Chawatani Chomvigi, 종위기 니바디 간자 비주동 사스탐블라야 타마들라야 가서 에디노스는 간질 하데데 근데 딱 거리에서는 가서게 내지 타본테게 거기다 리카 무니까 수직 진도세 되게 다 전통으로 지어져요레스.
Any questions to follow up on that?
다데라야 아니 그 진데 드라도 yes.
Yes.
Joe, yes, I have one question.
Yes.
Tanda ge daw this losa ge lage. Thank you, Paris. Can I back the slide,
Yes.
please? Okay. Tanda di tiwas tanza. Tanda di ngombu sumda phosphate group. Di again malay the phosphate group none phosphate rare kapa kya undi any trouble ge energy ragre sumda ge. Thama dela any addition is the dichibul hard over molecule sumda. The phosphate group rare ko any molecule kache undi any trouble ge energy the condition rago rest. The my sheets has drona. The radonde. Not this should have
How I have mentioned about one the bond was break from each loosen of each like the phosphate group. You have mentioned about releasing of energy, and I'm just a bit confused or not clear about how that energy was released when the bond is break.
Okay, yes. So how the energy is released is the biology people need to tell you that. I assume that you knew this. So my basic assumption going in is that you understand the release of energy. It would take too long for me to try to explain that now. But what you do need to know is that each bond has high energy between it. I'm not going to go into the details of how the energy is released, but it's important that there is energy released between each of these bonds. And that's what we capitalize on, or that's what we use in the adenosine receptor binding.
다다다데 가서 바나 조데가 속에 다 포스페트 루카드즈 바로라 트픽이 창와다 저기다 단다게 디두기 창와 디 바로라 요픽이 창와 소망나라 아니 뉴바요리스 단다 남진 바나 디가 속에 하퍼트 징위 차이를 그 값을 그 창와디 조비 값을 그걸 창와디 시피 값을 가서 뉴와 이런 거 요바데 징위 차이를 그 값을 두 장고지리스 디 콘데 시자 바나 코 준랑 보시고 거 그리스 다단다 바나 니 카나도치가 소파치게서는 제초게 니 고 창와디 조비 값을 니와친 종고 요바 제초가 하고 요셔 사사게 아니 아직 디나도치라야 아니 지금 저셔도 제바 인스타 단다디 저기 가르스 스타마라야 지금 창와 여러 가지 드기 창와 여러 드기 창와 참아나라야 니바 요레스와 아니 창와디 다 시비 값을 창와디 조비 값을 되게 나라 요비기 니바데 도스란도 지금 요레스.
The main thing I will say, though, is you can see here, this is actually a 5-minute video that I took a screenshot from, and I'll share that video. It goes over nicely how ATP to ADP works. And so I'll share that video in the Google Drive.
단다디 가르스는 데라 직전 샤주티 그런가 진기년 통치나미 된 샤주티나 도치 옌스 로티 나라니 가수게 ATP 니 ADP 란 주르기 니스티 모토 야부지 나샤스 로티 제라니 두스 단다 Google Drive 나샤기 옌스 디치 수타나 디레스.
My main point was to use something that you know about, I hoped, to show you how it can connect to something we want to learn about.
단단히 저던 게 레와디 가르스는 제쪽에 인샤샤스야지 단단히 원던데 인샤샤스여로 다데 신기 요레사 말와 디 아니 이 다시도 하 고약이 냈던 지 배치당데 아니 그 살바지 하 고약이 냈던 지간에 살바지 장하다야 배치당하게 레와딘다 제바인스.
Okay. Any more questions about coffee, caffeine, adenosine, and its binding?
한다 단단가서 커피를 테나나오피 카페인데 테네 아데니슨데 테나싱게 그게 창와당들 비기 좋아하시는 바 아이오스. 그거면도 어떻게
것이 뭔가에
아다
그것도 얘기한다.
그게
어야. 단다 간주 디 ADP네 ATP를 줄도 잠바야 phosphate 라야 Z 넘벨레 와이나 아니 Z 야레 와이나 그 phosphate 라야 디칠로 넬레 와이나 ATP 차도도 단다 숨요 와이나 ni mando maybe in a GP like the chick mando may na mono say the chagdwa chazan ta nganzu namju thabung la nuwa khante slegere labdu pena nganzu ki ngarze glucose da tzo sebal tene postpaid number le waina an thabung la ya nuwa legere lagdwa ta chwa karres la ina tanda nganzu ki ane coffee da tzo tong baina coffee da cha kabna la capen la ya ze digi ane postpaid dinde number jawana shi chene ane wangza la nuwa Tubuleje and Nima Kubache, Tungri chat in the Negi Yorbes, than the Kevin Digi postpaid Numbe Jagi Yorbes, that you want on it today.
Tapke is going to make you translate all that.
Tapke in case on Chisa.
So I was wondering about the biology, the conception is every time when you add more how to say? Phosphate.
Yes.
Yeah, phosphate, and they will get more energy. So which make cell need to be. But my question is, when we having a caffeine or coffee, that sort of that function, and also sort of function, is they doing more addition of the phosphate, or how does it work? Basically, how to relate to what you are trying to concept and this.
Very good. Thank you. So the energy is when the phosphate breaks. So you actually have to put a little energy into the system to make it from ADP to ATP. So in cellular respiration, to go from ADP to ATP, you have to put in a little bit of energy.
That's the thing about ATP ni ADP lanjuru kasu ni logo yorwa. Mana ngasuta tanda de kapsu ngasu kasure. That ADP ni ATP la paran juri kapsu sa ni chwa ne sun chwa la juri kapsu karchigore sene chunga pala ya ta sapata ngasu ge dirdwa ane chapongi unjung kapsu sugora da chapongi da ko unjung di kapsu ane ko niwatis ji parte gu yores.
The mitochondria in the cell stores the ATP, and then when you need to use energy, then that ATP gets broken off into ADP or AMP. So the phosphates will break off when it's time to use the energy after the molecule of ATP is stored in the mitochondria.
Tandagi ATP churo ATP di tanda de tan nubar wa nubar de ko sonye chigo yore sena nga suge ta niche taskunatale ko te chigo wa sonye chigo wa ta nubar de gubi kapsa ane tini ko ta de ta ane ATP di ne ADP la yanjur de ta nubar de lo yores.
I am going to see if I can very quickly draw on the whiteboard. Let's see. If I was in person, I would get on the whiteboard, I would draw. So if you have, this is the A, oh boy, this is not easy. A, and then T, P. So these are all P's. Okay, it's taking forever. So ATP is stored as a molecule. And then when it is time to use energy, you will break it like this.
A the ATP system balaya H tanta the phosphate PT smiorwa kuzu tampo nibadus suncha yobate and nibati nyatsa chishate masukana niche one tragna tele sunja chisha rest niba gubi kapsa nitanda tigna nita PQ mapercha de and PQ mapercha ne paru chawa the dola niba lubi rest.
So as you remove each phosphate, you're actually releasing energy.
That and those phosphate lobby cups, dig chawat tropic cups, tonguisuka chongores, and that's the new the loyong.
If you use up all the energy stored in an ATP molecule, all you will be left with is the adenosine.
That and the near person as ATP on the sonnet to be what's on my loads and with jelaya, and children of how particular is adenosine chipalaris.
And if you have a receptor that can sense adenosine, it will be able to measure that a cell has worked very hard because all the phosphates are gone and what's remaining is the adenosine.
Hanta tandagi adenosine titsur thini gita matsuge nilam bachio pambana tiga kare hak kresena ata adenosine chupul haba titsur de tan tegi ani kare desi jat kyoresena ani thapon tigi ani beka shiuchi chi le ani ko gangla ya ta adenosine gangla ya jer yochu gita tamponga sola ya phosphate chiorwa tizu chama ani dreba tizu ge chwa dreba de ani ko changyores.
Okay. So all the caffeine does is blocks that receptor so that the receptor cannot read how much adenosine is floating around in the cell.
The coffee no be caffeine ge chia karichi goresena tandaga nilam pati ku gala kakures ro kunjersa adenosine jersa de ka de ani kunjerga chigo marwa tin stambala ya ani chi thapon te ge nani ta dekachi ta niba katsu chi sesha katsu kali katsu chi khasha se ge chambati tangi chigo mares.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes, you need some more coffee, Dawa.
I think so.
Okay, a lot of words here. The next thing I want to go over.
Ta de che de la moto che de na la ya ta tsu man de shu chi is.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time on adenosine because I wanted you to understand that molecule or that neuromodulator and how it relates to the initiation of sleep.
Ta danda nga su adenosine gang la ya ani su shu chi tang yu is ta ti tang ya ge jin zen de che zu ge adenosine se de kari men ta ani la par de te kar sang de la ya wang su ge ta tok ro chi she la da ge tok ko chi
Similarly, we have other neurotransmitters that are more aligned with wake or arousal. How you know you're awake? So here's just a list of neurotransmitters that are involved in being awake. Okay, so if I'm teaching this in class, which I do every semester that I teach the sleep class, I want the students to memorize these neurotransmitters. So if I just show you this list, it will be very difficult for you to remember all of the names of the neurotransmitters. So another thing we can do is start to think about where do we see these neurotransmitters, where are they in the brain, and what do we know about them? So many of these are familiar neurotransmitters. You may have seen the names of many of these as you have studied neuroscience. And just as we could look at caffeine and see what effects it has on adenosine, you could do something similar for each of these neurotransmitters. So for example, acetylcholine, this neurotransmitter you will be familiar with from movement. It's the active neurotransmitter at the neuromuscular junction.
wansa ta shane ni chag paro tinsam chiwa tela yo big wansa tumbatres.
But you also have examples of occurring of substances or of drugs that have an impact on this neurotransmitter.
That in our shingi that degi wansa tumbandela ya shuchin tenigi yang as with zeta mendina yubaris.
So hopefully no one is smoking cigarettes, but the active ingredient in cigarettes is nicotine, and nicotine actually helps along with this neurotransmitter.
Chesunone tama toni the yubi rochime sra and that tamak nalaya nicotine say zichio is that nicotine zedege and it and asubia and the ones that too much to one data yam to yanko alikachiris de la switching tigris.
So people who are cigarette smokers will take a cigarette break when they want a little more alertness. They will go and they'll smoke a cigarette because it will activate this neurotransmitter.
Tamateni by na tamateni kutsuge and Sansamaya tamateng person in the language is person that the tamatongu recordla by na and the tamatin the nicotine dicarchigres and that de la estucolens on DNA is helon chigioris.
Another one is histamine. Histamine is another really important neurotransmitter in control of wakefulness.
That shendachikares and I want to timba shendachikares and histamine D and also and the celly de caps hachan de chimbu yo bigger. I want to watch this.
So in the brain, histamine is in charge of helping to keep you awake.
Also big and ani so the histamine lecasuticars and natural celly de celaya tanzigioris.
But in the rest of the body, in the periphery, it is in charge of how you respond to allergic signals.
That dinner also zupugi tala, that's zupugi lepanona lecatigo, wrong also zupugi chashi shendalaya, and carichigo resistant carilla pentores, and Niketi shenda nechutul noegi uncle gentina ruch chomba and banatilla yalenkana ruch tego iris and tigitala yakuga and tanzigoris.
So there are many classes of drugs called antihistamines. And those antihistamines that you would take for maybe sneezing or coughing or an allergy, these are antihistamines. Their goal is to block histamine's actions.
Allergy. Matropage that you Nathan do John by Banatela ya menchis the mentimilla antihistamine layata histamine tobachi segurata teens tambalamente saba in a carchigoresana ne histamine cheliti and you could go pachigores.
Okay, so we'll come back to antihistamines later on.
Mahanda and the antihistamine corlaya jelamotochins.
Okay. The other thing I want you to, I want to show this. Ooh, here we go. So this shows these neurotransmitters that we just described. And this is just I'm quickly going to show where they're distributed in the brain.
Data once a chimba data, let big chashi power go you made the layatungins.
Oh, let's go back. All right. Oh, they don't all show at the same time. Here, if I escape. Oh, right. I do. Oh, not all the way. Let's try again. Here we go. Right. So I wanted you to see how all of these neurotransmitters are working throughout the brain.
That under you want such a bad data as well, a big chashi yons, Kogita Chilin Dongo Pate, and it's the Tongodos.
The list that I showed you before now has an image to go along with it.
The young Atsugi that Tuchila Tower, I want such a button, David took Hachila Tire.
So all of these have their cell groups, and those are what's labeled. The solid bits are where the cell group originates, and then the arrows show where it connects to.
한다 단다 데이터라야 그게 셀 그룹스나 차풍그 덴슨지요 레스트라야 도도도도도 민치샤도와 대체 아니 그 조가레스나 거니 연구예매와 대체 거니 연구예매 대체 아니 되게 제라야 단다 그 챈다 data 가치도와 data 데이터게 아니 단다 원서 좀아서 가고를 주고 예매기 다도 땡겨레스.
So if I'm teaching this in class, I actually need the students to memorize what the structure is and where it projects to.
한다 단다 ngaran 좀 진짜 뮤직 TV 값인바나 아니 loktusolaya 아니 그 단다 그 원서 첨반데 레피기 차시 거치나 연구요메다 아니 때 아니 그 레피기 차시 거를 주고요메로 거니 턴지 거를 주고요메기네 단데 loktusolaya 지 담보네 loktuso기다 삼루나들이 그 론진트 바지 알아야 요치기스.
Now, when you are teaching in class, you can give the students the opportunity to discover about these by looking them up themselves, or you can present this information, but you give them enough time and they can take it home and study it. And then when you start to assess or ask questions, you really want them to be able to tell you the names of all the neurotransmitters and what they do.
한다 단다게 데려도 그 덕트라 네스디로 코토시베 값이 지지나 담보들에 덕트라 버리 데려도 때데다 구수문이 가나도 지해기 유메데다 되게 제라야 아니 가서 그래 수수 모터 제다 아니 염나 덕트라야 담보네 데다 모터 지는 거 제라야 아니 덕트솔라야 다 단다데 원서 첨바 원서 첨바 가리 예멘다 구수 제리 가리 예멘 거라 유메 거르고 유메라 소바데 네 구수 뭐네 네 지금 장야로다 띵세 보고네 장야다 네 하고야라야 네 지금 추수 미친지 고르지고요레스.
Why this is helpful is if the students know what each of the neurotransmitters do, then they can start to think about what effects a drug might have if the drug works on any of these neurotransmitters.
다다다 가서 원서 첨반데 딱긴 거 유메당 거네 정부 유메당 아니 그쪽에 제일 가리 이면라 소파 하고 바이나 아니 데이터라 카테 지야게네 메요라메 멘티즈고리카 간다로 지기 유메당 멘티가 간다슬리카 지기 유메라 소파 아니 하고야라야 펜토보요레스.
So what would you expect if I gave a drug that blocked histamine? What would you expect to be the effect in terms of arousal?
한다다데 값인바나로와 맞죠 다 histamine 요로와 histamine 원서 첨반데 뭐니게 멘치테 바인바이나 아니 데라야 아니 가서 셀롱 테니로 셀롱 테니 네 제출라 네 되게 슈진 간다로 직제게면 슈진 간다로 직제게면 데라 슈진 가리 직제면로 지기요레스.
Anyone from the group, what would your guess be if we blocked histamine? What would happen to your wakefulness?
딱 게테와 네 시초나네 소니오나 소니치가 소로치 스케팅 속에 histamine 까바인바이나 아니 텔라테네데 아니 슈칭가리 용그레스.
대 가샤와이나 니세바다 쿠바데 다다 당지 제투 말이죠.
If you block it, we cannot control the awake and asleep.
Yes, you can control it because you have many other systems that are also trying to keep you awake, but it will reduce how awake you are.
But 제바이마이나 저기다 control 다 지트마리스타 당진 지트마 가실라 바이나 아니 가르소그리다 데라야 고리카 진이게 양원서 tumba 셴다 망부치고라디 스탄발라야 고춘 당진 지트마리스 임바이나야 단다가서 히스타민기 젤리치고라데게 데네데 가바이나 내가서 세대에 양 고기다 세다우치바나 세대 양고 지마라 당트레스.
So if you have 5 neurotransmitters that are really important in keeping you awake and you block one, then you only have 4 doing their work. So you will still be awake, but you might be drowsy.
다 단다데 값은 아주 세대 데라야 jel리진이 원서 템방아 요레스 데나니 식가와 임바이나 아니 가서 그래 다 거기다 뉴반로스 그러다 세누위 세라고도 제마나 조지 네 아니데 그거 말했어 임바이나야 지금 세대마 this 마 밥데데 아니 가서 지가서 그래 아니 큰일 줘야겠네 단다고 지어로 어디나 연구했어.
And we actually do see this with medications that block histamine, for instance, Benadryl or DPH. I don't know what they would be called, but there are NyQuil. Any medications that people take for allergies sometimes will have the side effect of drowsiness.
다 단다게 다 나츠게 Benadryl 당 에디피셀 소파 단다데 아멘 카츠도 가다 민단 담다 요로와 데이터 따바이바이나 아니 티가르스네 양 나이트 코스 나츠 참발라 tum티 베카스 찬나 고동아이 치워 나딘 바이바이나 멘틴다 리디 통바이바이나 아니 데라야 코게다 슈첸도 가리오레스네 메데 디스카스 그레다 아니 해치가 아니 크피치가게 슈첸데 테트 그로레스.
So some drugs cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. So they can do their effects in the body, but they won't get into the brain.
다 멘카지바이나 아니 거기 젤레딩아 수즈 보고 나라야 거기 니바된다고 마통아 술레피나야 듣고 말했어.
And they actually have some allergy medicines that they say are non-drowsy formula. And what they do is to make the molecule too big to get into the brain. So it can have the effects at the nose and in the lungs where it needs to, but doesn't have an impact on the brain, which means you won't get drowsy.
다 단다데 가서 가서 알레르기가 멘티나 사지고로 가서 마트로파기 니컵테 가서 알레르기가 멘티 사야라야 아니 지가 안일 해야기 슈친데 멤버즈야라야 빈사 멘티나 요레스 멘티나 주디 가리르세나 멘티기다 거기 최종적으로 첨부된다 주데디와 거기다 디디그름 발라야 첨부된다 주데데 내가 속에 레바난 루마트 같이 레바난 루마트 스탄발라야 가서다 안일 해야기 슈친데 아니 멤버차기 요레스.
Okay. So being able to make these connections to things that the students may be familiar with can be helpful. And you can tie it back to the neurotransmitter systems.
다 데이터 아니 속축기다 하고에게 데이터 니 당분에 하고 임바이나 아니 펜토고요 리스커치라 바이만 데이터 등아 속에 네 원사 침바탄 냠든 데와다가 시작된 거요레스.
Okay. So I wanted you to understand about the neurotransmitters. If we go back to what my goals are, I want you to understand about the neurotransmitters involved in sleep and wake, but I also want you to know something about the structures.
네 독주수원의 원사 첨바디 가리 유메 가리 예멘디 하고지 아니 디메세디 작고대야 하고에 되어도 중요했어.
Okay, first, any questions on the neurotransmitters that we just covered so far in the examples I gave?
다다다데 갑상아서 원사 첨바단 제위게 단다치 모터 지어로 저시데 모터 지에니 비슨 같이 보이치데 시자 예스 디콜라야 좋아 예스.
Everyone is quiet. That means they understand it perfectly.
아마 크스슨 데샤스타 되게 가리된 거스에서는 아마 아마 카스오 세찬 차바데 땡스.
Yes, we have questions.
Yes, let's hear it.
I wanted to know, like, when we are interested in a subject, we generally don't fall asleep. So
Yes.
I wanted to know, like, during that time, are these neurotransmitter in a huge amount? Like what happens when you are very interested and then you don't fall asleep?
Perfect. Thank you for that question. I am going to skip to here.
다단다게 걔네 좋아데 가리서 상상나가 속에지가 슈수수 가서게 지금 조시들로 해봐야 바이나 아니 다 니쿠야게 네탕데 연구요 말로 꽤 정보 데트고요와 어디스타블레티 값을 아니 그다 네탕데 간다도 차고요레스 되게 이제 원서 전반데도 하장 슈첨부를 받는다고 그래 네탕 간다도 그래스 좋아데.
Okay, so I'm going to show this, but then go back and establish how we get to this point.
Anda tanda de kapsing this job jelaya masu tanda ni tanda la kandas lamenting what is.
Okay. All right. So that is part of what I wanted to show you. So thank you for asking that question.
Anda de ngarange zo de ngarange jiga tengi tuyagi chashi chai is wa things tambalaya draw the power to chis.
Okay. So before you can understand that, I want to just go over some of the structures that are involved.
Da tanda ge te de ma ji ngwe la ya te tang de o yo ju ge ya chapo khach ko la ya and de shi jagins.
I could just show you this list. And the structure here is the VLPOA. Don't worry about the name of it, but it is a specific set of neurons that will suppress alertness, make you sleepy. They promote sleep. Their job is to stop you from feeling awake and to help you to start to sleep.
Tanda de kapsa nga suge lepin ng chako chwa chako de also mixing dunkusik to ata de bana ko ge chapon khach ke tubaje ani ko chu ge ta zo jeli de ga resena nga chu ani seba tang ta chongcha chi ro chongcha de tang chi lepin ng ne ta chi karsu ge shi chu to ta ya ge de to man jom gres jinwa tang ya chi ani seberang jin de jinwa tang ani nga chu ani khper chi ani ba per chi ge rang sin de chi che tang go res tanda de ge ani lepa ge chashin de ge de pate de res.
So if we look at this brain, this slice of the brain, this is a sagittal section. So it's cut right through the middle and we're zooming in to this section right here.
Okay.
And the two colors here, the blue means inhibitory or it reduces, and then the orange is excitatory or it enhances. And you can see that you have excitation traveling out towards the cortex, which is where you would have your executive function and thinking, that sort of thing. So you can see that's traveling to the cortex. There are also projections going down into the cerebellum as well as the spinal cord, which will be more involved in movement. So the relationship between rest and activity is when you're alert, you can move around more. If you're very tired and sleepy, it's difficult to move. But you can also interact with the system in the reverse. That is to say, if you're feeling sleepy, you can get up and move, and that movement will help to reduce how sleepy you feel. So if we think about sleep and wake as a seesaw, just on the childhood playground, if you think about it like a seesaw, on one side is sleep and on one side is wake, and they cannot both be active.
안다 그 가서 그랬다 지금 니차 냠도 냠부 간에 지다 세대에서 걸어다 active 정부 임비기 내단데 연구요 말이스.
So if you are sleepy, that will exert pressure and inhibit the wakefulness.
한다 단데 게테처럼 니 군유도 바인바나 니 쿠바텔라 텐데데 세바텔라 아니 너시테데 세바테 아니 진용한 단계로레스.
You'll also notice it's one structure here that's mostly driving the sleep.
한다 단데 두스타 바인바나 가서 니 쿠퍼 지니게 차고데 두스타 조데 찍으러도가.
And three structures that are driving the wakefulness.
한다 니 세버 지니데라야 차고 숨도가.
So these three structures all together are doing things to try to keep you awake, but when the sleep structure puts pressure on that wakefulness, it will reduce wakefulness and allow sleep to happen.
한다 다다데 값은 가서 니 세버 지니게 다 차고 주 숨차게다 세버 지고요. 와 이마나야 한다 가서 니 크버 지니게 아니 차고 되게다 세버 지니게 차고 되다 강라야 너시 제바 임바나 디 값을 가르치고 그래서는 가서 니 세 대비게 내tan테 니 진용하다 내가 저 니 크버 지야게 내tan테 아니 시치르고요.
When you're awake, the wakefulness centers will put pressure on the sleep center to keep it quiet.
한다 다다데 가서 니 세요비 값을 가르치고 그래서는 니 세요비 값을 아니 그게 아니 니 쿠비기다 그게 지금 저진이기 지금 데니지고로 때라 노시테데데 아니 쿠가서 그랬다 다 리카 메바다 쿠슴슨데 지기지고레스.
So we call this in the sleep community, we call it a flip-flop. It's just like the seesaw, and you go between sleep and wake.
한다 다다데 값을 아니 그 도시 진이즈금이 나데 값을 가서게 플립플롭스 그랬다 가서 때라야 세탄이니게 레미스 그랬다 그 단단가 수타와 다진 단야 총아 지진의 세빈이 버데 바치진의 니게 네발라데 조라데 파츠 지금 레미지게 요반데 단트 진짜시죠 그랬어.
So these systems will shut each other down.
한다 단다게 말아 대치도가 말아 대주게 안에 반순라야 안에 반순기 제니드 멤버스 그랬어.
So what these arrows mean is that when the awake systems, so remember, I'll show you very quickly, there are three or more systems. When the awake systems are activated, they are putting pressure to inhibit or stop the sleep area.
한다 다다데 가서가 수가 니다 셀리데바게 당진 진이게 된선 데다가 왔다 그 살롱 집이 값을 아니 그게 아니 쿠야게 아니 그게 대화되라 아니 그 진이게 대화되라 논시테데데 아니 그게 가서 그러다 아니 쿠야게 니탄테 멤버치기요레스.
When that is happening, when this system is active, it is suppressing or shutting down the sleep system, and that is shown by the dashed arrow, which means that it cannot shut down this system.
다달데 가서와 세베기 말라데기 아니 그 니비가 말라텔라 노시테비 값을 봐 단다타 마르고 파텐도와 이스탄발라야 파조차테 니티 그로마 니기 니법 디스코라 니기 말라테 아니 그 구잡샤고요와 어떻든 거레스타 티가 갈라얀다 터치 차차차여서 나타티 가르쳐 거레스나 당아주 세데비기 니법텔라야 아니 간수가 니기 당도여지게 되네되게 파조 세계대위게 되네데라야 아니 슈친트레트 금에 받던 거레스.
So when it's activated, these arousal systems can continue to release the neurotransmitters that we just described.
나한테 단다데 값은 아주 살롱게 되네던 저요 쪽에 다 살롱게 니밥딜라 데비 값이 많이 단단가 수고 못을 지외게 왕사 첨바데다니 뭐도 고슬로 용거레스.
It's the release of these neurotransmitters that helps the body to feel awake. And if you cannot achieve this on your own, sometimes we can supplement these neurotransmitters so that your body can feel as if it's awake.
아니 삼성라야 가지고 질론이 있는 거 아니 그렇지 되게 내가 보나라야 되는 거 저한테 준비했어.
The opposite is also true.
데는 더 바이바이나야 되게 더 베게 그렇지 되야 치파레스 리야 덴바레스.
When the sleep promoting area is active, it will exert inhibition or it will shut down these arousal systems.
다 니쿠야 단 되어요 지금 다 말아지고 와대와대 아니 그 정부 차바이마나 되게 가서 설리대 이야기 엔티티와지고 와 어떻게 가자고 그래서 되게 구자버지 그래서
And when it shuts down these arousal systems, they are unable to shut down the sleep system. So this dashed arrow means that it's not having the same effect in stopping this sleep area.
다다데 값은 가지고다 니던 되어요 지금 말아대게 아니 그 새벽 말아대 구잡사서 아니 티 값은 아니 세던 세야던 되어요 지금 말아대게 아니 그야던 되어요 지금 말아대 구잡 그 말이스. 나 띵아서 올라야 이거 차요 지금 다 터치도 되게 있어.
So then this dashed arrow also shows that it's not releasing the neurotransmitters. And by not releasing these neurotransmitters in the same way, slow wave sleep happens. And so you don't have an alert waking system, you have a slow wave sleep.
kalsongresena seya tang ro yu ji wang sa chamba de tang logo me pa tang go res ta de ta logo me pa ba na nga chu zhongbu me ba che ro ta nga chu ni sang yo ma wa o de che ane ti kap se nga chu la ya ni de la bu ro le te mo yin bi ni ni wat mo go res.
The reason I specify that it's slow wave sleep is because this is not the same system as dream sleep or what we call rapid eye movement sleep, REM sleep.
한다 단다 데 값은 가지고 텔럽게 니세가 진선디 가린 세난 데 가지고 가서 그래다 아말람 땅도 지가 미그니 와트 땅야나 가지고 가서 મં근이 무근이세 저로 와테 땅 지바 마레스 체장데 아니 텔럽게 니세 데라야 되지스.
Okay, but that's another lesson, a completely separate lesson. For this one, the relationship between awake and asleep is that if you are awake, you can suppress the sleep system and it cannot have an impact. And if you are asleep, you can suppress the wake system so that it doesn't have an impact.
한다 니게 빈스만 보시도가 되다가 임바나 가지고 영선 신신다 지라 메시지하고 그 조시된데 자고 도스다 단단디 값은 이거에 가게세나 가지고 셀론던도 지금 말라디로와 데코 아니 그 정보 차이 바이나 되게 아니 가서 그래 가지고 니던 데비가 말라디 그 광고지게 받아 아니 니던 데비가 말라디 아니 그 정보 차이나 되게 가지고 세 받던 데 지금 셀론던도 지금 니 말라 있는 거 대화되니 그게 지금 거듭지게 그랬어.
So to get back to the question before, here's how we're going to tie it together.
한다 단데 데가 트러스트 땅서 트러 땅주 되게 렌 해라야 니 단단가 속에 니 무트 지주고 니던 데다 저거가 로진 저거 이미 다 인스.
Okay, so again, not always translated, but here are the neurotransmitters that are involved in alertness or wakefulness. So you can see these four, and then there's this extra one here.
한다난 딜라야 아따 ngasu question지도 가르세나 세롱탄 저요 주게 아니 왕자 틈바 시제와 시제니 되어라 대파지제 상아티고 있어.
And these are having an influence on the arousal centers.
한다 데이터 왕자 틈바 데이터게 ngasu 세롱탄 저요 지금 말아치고와 어때 가라야 아니 고식진트 그랬어.
Now, these neurotransmitters, or the orexin neurons, they take signals from the amygdala as well as other emotion centers. So the motivation to remain awake comes from other things.
that and the Corsica to saper there or the Sally de Gua Sagita achieve with the motivations like Colon said and Shendan is.
So as you are trying to fall asleep right now, it is probably because the motivation to remain awake is low.
That get it and the chits in you to be by now, and it dig of Delaya, and the picture around say they need you or what take a Colon de and it's Sama which how English.
So yesterday I had a question about how to get students interested in a topic that they're not interested in. And sometimes you have to use emotions.
The Kasanga so George Lepar is get it around Laya, and it look to Joshichikulaya, Dona Mepa in Bana, Dona Laya, and you Karsugre.
So you can be exciting, or you can be scary, or you can be funny.
Do not have a jala carici or is at the trottle here. Is that take up in by nature on the Chiyanko, Yan Sambo, Shannon Sao, or what a drum dachi, the Tekusu do not have a chair is.
Or you can do something unexpected, like talk about your children who are swimming right now.
Yana Yanko, Tanda Churunga, that the church gig there, or church gig you so you condition and chorus.
And what that does is it creates a little bit of a difference so that your emotion systems start to influence these neurons that will have an impact on the alert system.
That under day Jones Nambala, Karichigores, and Tanangasuge, that Joshi Chigora, Tita Mando, Chindish Jones Nambalaya, take up some mish and that take it, and Yenigi, the Samyung Granshin teaches to pitch it on Gora, Tistabalaya, Tila Tendidati, or the Samyon to pitch it down by Bina, and you could so Tandagi Dizu Karsaweta, the separate Chiag Colonchi or the Donochin Colombian curious.
So if someone is very nervous, if they're very afraid, or if they're very happy, sometimes it can be difficult to fall asleep.
That get the meeting after Lebado, Shu Yanchi, do not shoot Lebain Banaya, New Kualaya, Capuris.
And there are different types of teachers. You have some teachers who want to scare you. You have the teachers who you're afraid of, and that makes you motivated to stay awake.
That young Tansan Carriers and Gela Yantis to Shana so in the Yaris. Charon Drova and Bana, Gelatin and Andrus to Bangantosi, they were in the Yoris, Tin Tambalaya, Jingan took a sort of Latin data because Genuine silly the agony, something good.
And you have other teachers who are funny or exciting or unexpected, and that all helps to lead into the motivation to remain awake.
That young Gigan Shambai Bana could turn on Sao, Tan Chop Sao, Tan Chi Tramda Yorwa, or Teta Yoris, the team Bana Teta Karchigores, and Telatin Dete, and then as to sell it the Elaya, and it could haunt it to Yoris.
So if you think about sleep and wake as a switch, maybe a light switch, you can flick it on or off.
And that Tandanga set on Yeti Chesuga, so a lock it, go what a lock bread and say egg, George you get. And a local good in the sandwich town by Bana, and to prepare dance and cheers.
So these neurons would be similar to if you had some tape that you used to hold the switch. Just think about the light switch, and you would put it in the on position, and then you would tape it and hold it in the on position.
That they can't do it, and then you chew get once a tomato the carriers, and Niketi Charangeta, a lock team bana, locuti, a lock per data, locuti per jugala sharwa. Nishata, Nitigala, Ningasuge, Jashua, Jiki Jashua, Jashuke, Jerbanan, Jashoda is.
They also have drugs that can help with this. There are some drugs that people take, or even things that will help to keep alert.
Tatina Delaya, Karsugret, didn't know your chito and a maintenance is. And a Charanji Trumbo Delaya, and a peg and maintenance is.
Okay. So my question for you is, if we go back to the coffee, which one of these do you think the coffee is having an impact on? Which side is coffee working?
Coffee gonna some young system by Bana, and a coffee can get you should take those. That's said on Yeta by Bana can get Helaya cook the liquor chick those. Coffee.
They're muted. So hopefully somebody's gonna say, where is coffee having an effect? What's it doing?
아하. 아치기치 송로치다. 커피기 시킨 거라 되게 유명이네 탐pen 메시지자.
패시 니를 속았으라 니 구축 매와 니 가고스
It prevents sleeping.
Good, which is different from waking you up.
아하. 다티야 로아. 단다가 니 가고 요래서야지 야 저런 가서그래. 세바디 빼고 요래서야 지고라. 대도 만들어도 와.
So what it does is it blocks the sleep side.
아하. 딱 지에 가르치 커피기 지에 가르치고 그래서나 거기다 네 값을 아니 니 땅도 요쪽에 지금 되어지고로 되깎여 그랬어.
So if coffee blocks the sleep side, then this is going to reduce how much pressure this can put on the wake side. So it will stop you from being fully asleep and allows you to be a little bit more awake.
다 되게 가르치고 그래서 담발라야 그 커피 되게 니티 가게 예장 아니 니티 가발라 되는데 다 니게 아니 가서 그 세비 네발라야 지금 논시트에 진용했던 거 그래서 담발라야 니 밥 연구는 네버티 진용성 아니 가서 세게 네버티 지 소원도 그래서
Whereas the emotions have an impact on the wake side.
다단다 데이터 아니 현대에 답변이나 가서 생명기 관계라야 행거요래서는 생명기 아니 가서게 세비기 네버티라야 수준도 그래서
So the effect is the same. You don't fall asleep, but it's working on two different sides of the sleep-wake system.
다다데 값을 그런 게 네던데 이샤 값을 수준도 지바레스 가시나 니 마코기 네던데 지고와 임바이나 양코게 지금 리츠가 되는 셰바인바이나 수준 조사가 되는 셰바인바이나 맞추 세바다 니 땅세 니 세기에 말라되게 초만도 아니라야 니 그거 수준 되게 그랬어.
So if you're just a regular person walking around their day, taking a coffee or a tea, black tea has more caffeine. So if you're doing that, you don't care if it is keeping you awake by making you more awake or by reducing your drive to sleep.
다시 남진 가서 소를 니침배나 남진 소를 니 되게 가서 커피 통화다야나 차 통화 차 나쁘 나나요 가서 카페 시켜요. 나 dinalo 통고 요바이나 아니 알레 텔라 테네데티 니 쿠야티 그 가서가 니 조야티 제마 당거요레 아니 양나가 셀리데게 니버티 지투아 당거요레사게 네던티 골라 가서기다 그 야크레지가 말레스.
It only matters if you're a neuroscientist. If you're a neuroscientist, then you care that it is blocking sleep versus enhancing wake.
아하. 다 원사 생을 빠지 임바나 되게 다시 콜라야 캐퍼리오레스 다 텔라테니데데 그 아니팅 고퍼치기도 해 양나 셀리데게 니버디 베기도 해서데 원사 생을 빠지라 개침부차기 그랬어.
So after going through this, it would be important for me to find out if students are able to tell the difference between activating the arousal system or activating or blocking the sleep systems.
다 지상 데라로 친데시 자는 거 제라야 나가랑 오늘 롭트 속에와 아니 가서 그래 당아주 셀롱게 네버디 셀롱게 네버디 페버 진이리도에 야나 아니 가서 가서 ཉել람 ཉ에마람 밤니게 네버디 고바 진이리도 세기 띠기 딱 캐퍼시아데 아니 니 롭트 속군이 지시아지라리와다 지기바다데 양케 참고 차기스.
So if we go back to my intentions, I wanted to make sure you understood some structures and some neurotransmitters, but also the relationship between them.
다단다 가서 양청 가서 그 미기라야 치다바인바이나 가서게 왕서 첨바 같이 무신거요 바다 뜨거야 차고 무신거요 바다 네 데이터라 때문에 코로나 이거 바로게 다 제와요로 제와 어디 가리면 학고야 기르와 되지기스.
So what questions do you have that will allow me to understand if you understand the relationship between these?
제주문을 왔다 데이터 세니다 데이터단 저요 비고 하고요 지요로 하고요 바디 차이체도 미체중알아 니 저와도야 되는 거리스.
되게 더 좋아지 당 좋아지.
That's all.
되게 like this. 그래서 어디 truth. 니 코어도 니 세반이 flip flop 집어라서 지 야도 지 가마도 냠도 디녀도 연구 말한다서 되나 맞아 dolphin 코 추나로 디자네 또 추니 사실로 코 추나로 야 트윈스 요 만즈 트윈스 야 만즈나 코 우드라가 말아 오스제 디인데 코 니코에 디세메 와찬도 키나시도 아니 딜코 그 니가 디녀도 연구하러 nga 고야잖아 dolphin 니 쿠어를 니 세고를 스티니지 고뉴 지세지 메나코 아니 신도 그랬어
With that, see, so you have mentioned about the flip-flop model about the sleep and the wake cycle. And
Yes.
when you go to sleep, you cannot be awake. And I heard about dolphin goes like I heard about the question: does dolphin goes is sleeping or awake? And
Yes.
that like during the time they need to just jump out of the water at a time to get oxygen and then,
Perfect.
yeah. So
Yes. Excellent question. And this is great. The dolphin will sleep one hemisphere at a time.
that the trope 하고 두스나 로펜의 차샤바에 만나 그게 니쿠야 저러 가지고 레피게 듬시 찌리 니쿠요 레미치 니쿠요 레스.
So everything that's happening here, the sleep-wake flip-flop is happening on one side, and the other side is independently having the sleep-wake flip-flop in the other side.
that 로펜의 차샤바에 나 단단 가지고 될라야 레미치 저러 세바다 니쿠야다 세바 세니니가 레미치야 돼 로핀 바이나 로핀 게 레피게 듬시 치크나라야 티중고레스 듬시 젠다 티크나라야 듬시 땅보디 땅 저와 메비 보니라 라완트 양코게 단다게 세바다 니게 레미티 중고요레스.
So you can have one half of the brain in the dolphin being asleep, doing this, while the other half is doing this.
단데 dolphin 타윈 바나 카리오레스나 단데들 파니도라 땅마시도 오마시도가 dolphin 게 레파 듬시 치크나라야 땅마티 치기요 바나 듬시 젠다 티나나 오마티 치기요레스.
Some migratory birds like ducks can also do that.
데 나싱게 네코 니프로치니기 차단다 다 나마도 요와 쿠스인 바나 티치트크레스.
And what they'll do is they'll sleep in a group, and the ducks on the outside will sleep with one hemisphere. So they have alertness on one side, and the ones on the other side of the group will sleep with the other hemisphere. So they have alertness on one side, and then the ducks in the middle are fully asleep. And then they rotate around and they take turns so that each of the groups can do that.
Tatanda dekapsin bana yang tanda da ngamat sukuta niprensura kusin bana that de that sopa le jugo yo wa tin tambala chochila yoniti tage chochila yoniti ge lepa chochi de niku ta chojenda china yoniti ge lepa chojenda de niku ne tus je ani kimala yoniti petukrata lepa chani krajoro to je ani remshin de kusuga yang je niti jujapte yang ko tus ayunguyores.
Humans are not able to do that. Most mammals cannot do that.
한다도 미기된데 짓고요 말이스 레피 쇼시니 그 현대의 세대죠 때 짓고요 마티나 생활 속에 디느수소 초여라 느수소 지참이 된데 짓고요 말이스.
So dolphins are a special case and we admire them for their skills.
느수소 저 패치 짓고요 말이스 단데 가서 패치 짓고요 말이스 단데 가서 로핑이 된데 짓고요 레스 때라 가서게다 가서 그래 아따 이란도 나저도 지고요스.
What's interesting is as we are getting better tools to study smaller groups of cells within the brain, we're learning that it's possible that we may have sections of our brain that are awake while other sections are asleep. But that's very, very, very new, and they're still trying to understand and learn more about that.
단단가 주시야 지도와 같은데 단단 그런 거잖아. 지다 차풍 카치스고로 하다 용시지 아니 그 지카지가니 그 세비네벌로 픽업시 현다 가치가 니쿠야기 네벌로 같은데 도치 네 특시지 지 용용구요 레스닝 바이나 단다 데이터 서버지 레스와 네 단단가 주성공고 그 주지에 진도도게 디엘라야 포인스마 스토용.
Okay.
됐어요. Yes.
Other questions?
Our agenda is
요요. 다단다 니 세피 니우 펠이 온디 간라 니 안년용다 동아다니 강사 차리기난 자가 말을 납성아 잡으려 요래 납성아. 단디 단다 야만도 온도 때네 온디 간라 펜춘 동가리난 라지온도 시작한다. 안녕하세요 그디 전바 녹화 시즌도 또저 홀리 온디 간라 니쿠에데 가장도 단기 그러면 혼촌되나 않고 특점네 가장도 그 셀린도 시작한도 바로 저 새디 셀리 시작한도 저지디 간라 집안로 시작한도 잡으러도 하고 마송스
양치송다.
니 세피 니우도 야라 콤펠라 동디 간라 니쿠에데 다 전바즈고라 또 용으로 동작했는도
네.
그냥 이나 샤와직 말이지 니 세피니크 회주디 다 쿠피 나오고 세피니크 회에나 컴퓨터 동아에나요 아니 용어로 동아요 말이지 쿠피를 내가 들어와다 임바 니 잡으러 제자가라 또 잡으러 간지 지은 거요래지 또 잡으러 시고에 대 강사 산이 그 연된 로직 해서 또 연된 간지 지은 거라 아주 니 펜션디라 기타디 간라 집안로 창조인도 고알렌당라게
Yeah. You have mentioned about the differences of the effect and emotion and coffee, and one just reduces the sleepiness, and the other one just increases the wakefulness, right? So you have differentiated that different things, but when you give the example, we see it's pretty much the same. The effect, the result is same. So why neuroscientists differentiate that kind of processes?
Very good question. So in activity, it doesn't matter. As long as you achieve what you want, which is to stay awake, you don't care how it happens.
아니 게데다처럼 아니마 그 셀리데 정보 니트요 바이나 디코리스 다티 간다도 총타 간다도 가리라테 딜라야 캐프리오 마데 정보 대신에 디코리스.
But neuroscientists care about the mechanism because that allows us to think about which drugs might work better for disorders or what solutions to problems might be if there are damage in different areas of the brain.
근데 원서 생각바치라 되게 전부 작용을 스칼실라 바나 되게 레츠지고로 그 레가 제당 되게 넘버티 하고 되게 전부 작용을 되게 전부 잡아봐나 데이터 요는 진성거래서나 아니 딘다도 지용 바나 데라야 아니 가서래다 아멘 땅바나 아멘 가리기 지가 펜트고에 메다 양나 아멘티 땅바를 때는 데테 거기다 냐 숙제 냠바들 바나 로아다 전된의 지교 바나 정가리 가리를 지사를 지기 니고고요와 제장고 리츠디 하고야 돼 원서 생각바잖아 개침부작이어스.
So for instance, if someone is taking a drug, let me see here. I want to show these, I think the translation's here. Yes. So a drug like norepinephrine has an important role in staying awake.
다다다 데캅스 땅아 속에 메인 바이나 와 아멘티 norepinephrine 세도 딘다도가 멘치 당고요 바이나 되게 가리 팽고레스나 셀리데야라야 팽고레스.
If someone has is taking a drug that blocks or activates norepinephrine, we will see some effects.
다케테 미치게 데 가도 타야나 데 베게 멘트나 도세 바이나 나츠 슈친지 통그레스.
And if you want to think about how to solve that problem, it makes more sense to understand what caused that specific problem so you can address it instead of going to the whole system.
That is tambalaya kogele tsuti hako imbaina tanda tela tenede tan shuchinti kanado uchi yomegi shuchinti sech gorwata koge this hela ya ani koge da pentubogona dritko resta yanko cha yongla ya tamagwa chi tanda tela muxke de ta de tan yanko kangeti seberla ya betko res.
Another very important example that we could go over is when these neurons that are described here are completely damaged or absent, as is the case in narcolepsy.
단다기 왕사치도가 내가 요주고 왕사치도다 와라 원분하나 왕사치요 왕사 요주 되게 네 왕사대 촐라도바 임바이나 다 narcolepsy saying narcolepsy. Can you explain that one?
Narcolepsy is this sleep disorder where people fall asleep very easily. They cannot stay awake.
Other things tambalaya that they narcolepsy at it and you could not to get any chassis and I'm doing chassis water and you could a catina and you could have the crew say Matke Nathan Chachuro but take it Nichon younger is once that hasn't been my pina.
Coffee isn't very helpful for folks like that because the problem is not with the sleepiness, it's with the inability to stay awake.
That take up same bana kuso coffee on a pengio maris. Karishla pina and a kuso attack kuso and you katuna to do as you are. You need to do a day kusuge. I need to do a thing go back chilaya pengio maris. So the caris no kuso so de and a selly dead kiomarwa, selly deag in what you marwa, which is some coffee on a pengio maris.
So a treatment for a system like that would have to be on this side and wouldn't be on this side because it cannot help.
Tanda tinda do getanga suga nicheta ni betuko katuna ni tutu ade ni gimitna do imbana kola ya menta ya de ane ko geta separate deagi tigi chola ya ane tapsi tanga mentang guru matope ko ani kuya tanga do ju shote la chigoro da ko tiga menta chigoro te tamba ina ane pengyo mares.
So all things being equal, it doesn't really matter. But if there is something wrong or if there's something broken in the system, it really becomes important which part is affected. I know we're out of time for today, but we will talk a little bit more about some of this motivation to remain awake. Also includes things like hunger. It's very hard to fall asleep when you're hungry. And some of that we can actually look at the mechanisms of how hunger works and see why it has an impact on staying awake.
Masuge yang ci toko toya imba na yang tiang ko ge de ko la du reswa ni te masu toko toya ba na ni ku ka bo ma shi ro da se de la ya ni wat ci go res na te ka ps to ba de la te se ya de kan spek yo res ya te ani te ge ci li su te ko la yang asu je la ka la muto tangi muto ci ins.
So I want to be respectful of your time and allow you to take your break this evening. And I know you are off tomorrow. So I will stay around for questions if anyone wants to ask, but I want to officially wrap up. I'll let you know about your assignments for your on-site activity on Monday. I will put those in the drive.
Degrees that some those Zobayins and then so Yasani Consanchirwa. That Dawatan Deo Chuga and it's to Viagi, Chegutit and the Google Classroom and the Chusat in a Chipins.
I am going to assign you different topics to discuss in your groups on Monday in your on-site activity before I join you for your remote class.
That and I go to take a contact in the Matso while I shop in the Capsa to carry quality to Chigumi, she teaches like a quarter chickens.
So I will stop here, but I'll stay around a little bit if there are questions.
That and those stray by ins and they draw your banner and this chickens.
Okay. All right. Tuk Che.